The day I bought the worst house on the block, my family laughed so hard the neighbors came out to watch. It was late autumn, the kind of gray afternoon that flattens colors and makes even decent homes look tired. The house stood at the very end of Alder Street, leaning slightly to one side as if exhausted from decades of being overlooked. Its paint had faded into a color that could not decide whether it had once been blue or green. The front steps were cracked. The yard was more weeds than grass. A broken mailbox hung open like a mouth frozen mid-sentence. My mother covered her smile with her hand, but failed to hide the embarrassment in her eyes. My older sister openly shook her head, already calculating how long it would take before I admitted defeat. Even my husband stood beside me in silence, hands buried in his coat pockets, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. He had not stopped me, but he had not defended me either. They saw a ruin. I saw timing. For weeks, I had been studying city council announcements, buried in public documents no one else in my family bothered to read. Between grocery lists and late-night dishes, I traced lines on maps and followed rumors whispered in municipal budgets. The new metro extension, quietly approved, strategically delayed in its announcement, would cut directly beneath Alder Street. The station entrance was projected to be less than 2 blocks from this very porch. I had not told them. Not yet. The house was cheap because it looked hopeless. Because the previous owner had passed away without heirs. Because the roof sagged and the kitchen smelled faintly of damp wood and old wallpaper. Because most people saw only the present condition and not the future potential. At the small signing table in the notary's office, my hand did not tremble. I signed my name carefully, feeling something settle inside me. Not fear, not excitement, but certainty. When we stepped outside, my sister's laughter echoed louder than the church bells across the street. She whispered to our mother that I had always been impulsive, always chasing ideas too big for my means. That night, standing alone in the empty living room, I listened to the wind slip through the window frames. The house groaned softly, adjusting to my presence. Dust floated in the last light of day. I ran my fingers along the peeling wall and imagined polished floors, bright windows, and the steady hum of trains arriving beneath the ground. They thought I had made a mistake. I knew I had made a move. The house felt cold that first evening, but beneath the chill there was something else, an almost imperceptible pulse of possibility, like a secret waiting to be revealed. And secrets, I had learned, are most powerful when you carry them alone. The first winter inside that house felt like a test of endurance. The roof leaked during the January thaw, and I placed metal bowls beneath the steady dripping, listening to the slow rhythm echo through the hollow rooms. The heating system coughed more than it worked. Some nights I wore 2 sweaters and slept beneath 3 blankets, staring at the cracked ceiling while wind rattled the loose shutters like impatient fingers. My family visited only once. They stepped inside with careful, reluctant movements, as if the floor might give way beneath them. My sister's eyes scanned every imperfection. The chipped tiles, the uneven cabinets, the outdated fixtures that seemed frozen in another decade. My mother sighed quietly, the way she used to when I brought home report cards that did not match her expectations. My husband stood near the doorway, hands clasped, distant and unreadable. They did not say much, but their silence carried judgment. After that visit, they stopped asking about the house entirely. Instead, they spoke about other things in my presence: promotions, vacations, renovations in better neighborhoods. I noticed how often they used the word stability. I noticed how rarely they used my name. I worked alone. Every evening after my office job, I changed into worn jeans and tied my hair back. I stripped wallpaper from the dining room walls, uncovering solid plaster beneath. I sanded the floors until my arms trembled. I learned to patch drywall by watching tutorials on my phone balanced against a paint can. Slowly, almost invisibly, the house began to respond. The yard was the hardest. It had been neglected for years. I dug out stubborn roots and pulled weeds until my palms blistered. Beneath the wild overgrowth, I found the outline of what had once been a small garden bed. I planted hardy shrubs there, imagining commuters one day walking past, noticing a tidy corner in an otherwise ordinary street. Meanwhile, city workers began appearing 2 blocks away. At first it was just survey markers, thin wooden stakes with bright ribbons tied around them. Then came men in reflective vests measuring sidewalks, marking pavement with spray paint symbols no one else seemed to recognize. The neighborhood gossip dismissed it as routine maintenance. But I knew better. I watched from my front window, careful not to look too interested. The official announcement still had not been made, but rumors were surfacing online. Property listings nearby began to shift in price, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. A small ripple before a wave. One evening, my husband returned home later than usual. He looked around at the half-finished kitchen, at the new light fixture I had installed myself, and something flickered across his face, uncertainty, perhaps even doubt about his doubt. But he still did not ask why I remained so calm. In bed that night, I lay awake again, but not from cold this time. Beneath the floorboards, beneath the soil and stone, I imagined the future tunnels forming in silence. The thought steadied me. They believed I was enduring failure. What they did not understand was that I was building patience. And patience, unlike paint or plaster, cannot be stripped away once it hardens. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came the sound that changed everything. It began before sunrise one morning. A low mechanical hum vibrating faintly beneath the kitchen tiles. At first, I thought it was the old refrigerator struggling again. But the sound grew steadier, deeper, rhythmic. When I stepped outside, the street no longer looked forgotten. Bright orange cones lined the corner. Temporary fencing had been installed overnight. A large banner hung from metal poles, announcing what I had known for months. Metro Extension Project, Alder Station. The official confirmation felt almost anticlimactic. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind so many times that reality seemed softer than the fantasy. Still, my pulse quickened. Neighbors gathered in clusters, reading the sign, whispering. Some looked surprised. Others looked confused. A few glanced toward my house, perhaps remembering how recently I had purchased it. Construction began in earnest within weeks. The street filled with workers, trucks, and the sharp scent of asphalt. The noise was constant, drilling, hammering, the grinding echo of excavation. The once quiet block became alive with movement. Dust settled on windowsills, but beneath it there was energy. Property agents started appearing like migrating birds. They knocked on doors with polished smiles and well-rehearsed pitches. I watched from behind sheer curtains as they visited the elderly couple across the street. Soon after, a for sale sign appeared in their yard, followed by another 2 houses down. One afternoon, an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway. A sharply dressed man stepped out, scanning my facade with open curiosity. He knocked firmly, holding a folder embossed with a real estate logo. His gaze lingered on the freshly painted porch railing, the trimmed hedges, the new windows I had installed just weeks before. I listened without interruption as he described rising demand, investor interest, early projections. The number he slid across the small clipboard was already nearly double what I had paid. I felt no triumph, only confirmation. That evening, my sister called unexpectedly. Her tone carried something new, not mockery, not pity, but calculation. She mentioned hearing about the Metro project, as though it were gossip rather than public infrastructure. She wondered aloud whether I had known. The question lingered unspoken in the air between us. I offered no explanation. Inside the house, the changes were undeniable now. Sunlight spilled through clean glass onto polished floors. The kitchen no longer smelled of damp wood. The garden had begun to bloom, small white flowers nodding gently in the breeze. But what no one saw was the quiet satisfaction beneath my composure. The months of doubt, of laughter, of silent endurance had settled into something steady inside me. For the first time, the house no longer felt like a risk. It felt like leverage. And as the rumble of construction deepened beneath the street, I sensed that this was only the beginning, not just of rising property values, but of shifting relationships. Because success does not simply change numbers. It changes how people look at you. By the time summer settled over Alder Street, the laughter had disappeared. In its place came curiosity, careful, rehearsed, almost polite. The metro station entrance began to take shape 2 blocks away, rising from the ground like a promise carved in concrete and steel. Glass panels reflected sunlight across the street. New pavement replaced cracked sidewalks. Streetlights were upgraded. Even the old bakery at the corner reopened with a modern facade and higher prices. Alder Street was no longer forgotten. And neither was I. My mother visited on a Sunday afternoon, carrying a homemade pie the way she used to when she wanted to smooth something over without naming it. She stepped into the living room and paused. The walls were painted a soft warm gray now. The floors gleamed. The once crooked staircase had been reinforced and polished. Fresh flowers stood near the window. Her eyes moved slowly, absorbing the transformation. Behind her came my sister, dressed more carefully than usual, her smile bright but tight around the edges. She walked through each room with deliberate interest, touching surfaces, opening cabinets, measuring space with silent calculations. I could feel her comparing this house to her own townhouse across the city. They spoke of how lucky the timing had been. Lucky. The word settled heavily between us. It erased the winter leaks, the blistered hands, the quiet evenings spent studying city documents while everyone else dismissed my instincts. It reduced foresight to coincidence. I did not correct them. Over dinner, the conversation shifted subtly. My sister mentioned rising rent in her neighborhood. She described a business opportunity her husband had considered but postponed. My mother sighed about retirement costs and unpredictable markets. The tone had changed. I was no longer the impulsive one. I was the one who had somehow anticipated something they had missed. Later that evening, as they stood on the porch preparing to leave, my sister lingered a little too long. Her gaze drifted toward the station lights glowing faintly in the distance. The sound of a test train echoed underground, a low mechanical heartbeat beneath the soil. Her expression held something unfamiliar: envy. In the following weeks, more offers arrived. Investors, developers, even a small cafe chain interested in converting the ground floor into a commercial corner property once zoning updated. The numbers kept rising. And then came the twist I had not anticipated. One night, sorting through old papers in a storage box left behind by the previous owner, I discovered a sealed envelope tucked inside a faded cookbook. Inside was a copy of a letter dated 2 years before my purchase. A petition signed by several neighborhood residents requesting a metro stop on Alder Street. Among the signatures, written in careful handwriting, was my father's name. My father, who had passed away 3 years earlier. My father, who had always studied infrastructure, transportation, quiet patterns in growing cities. My father, who had once told me that opportunity rarely shouts, it whispers. Suddenly the house no longer felt entirely like my secret victory. It felt like an inheritance of insight. A realization settled into me. Perhaps I had not been alone in seeing the future. Perhaps I had simply been the only one who listened carefully enough to remember. And that knowledge shifted something deeper than property values. It shifted the story of who I was. The discovery of my father's signature lingered in my mind like an unfinished sentence. For days, I carried the copy of the petition folded inside my wallet. I would take it out late at night, smoothing the creases, tracing the familiar curve of his handwriting. It felt less like proof of a metro station, and more like proof of something else. Of belief, of foresight quietly passed from one generation to the next. And then 18 months after the day they left, the doorbell rang. It was early evening. The station had officially opened that week. Commuters now streamed past the house each morning, their footsteps steady, purposeful. A small coffee kiosk had appeared near the entrance. Property values on Alder Street had climbed beyond even the boldest projections. The worst house on the block now stood freshly painted, framed by neat hedges and warm porch lights. When I opened the door, my family stood there together. Not visiting, not passing by, standing as if they had rehearsed the arrangement. My sister held a box of pastries from the newly reopened bakery. My mother clutched her purse with both hands, her shoulders slightly tense. Even my husband, who had grown more supportive as the months passed, looked uncertain in their presence. They stepped inside slowly, as though entering unfamiliar territory. The air felt different now, no longer heavy with doubt, but thick with something unspoken. My sister's eyes moved across the living room, taking in the tasteful renovations, the subtle luxury. She glanced toward the window where the glow of the metro entrance reflected against the glass like a constant reminder. Their conversation drifted toward practical matters. Rising costs. Smart investments. The importance of family sticking together. The words were gentle, careful, but beneath them lay intent. Eventually, the truth surfaced, not bluntly but wrapped in concern. My sister and her husband had stretched themselves thin financially. An investment had failed. Their mortgage payments were growing heavier. They wondered whether I might consider partnering with them on a new opportunity, or perhaps helping them secure a loan using the increased equity of my home. The irony pressed against my ribs. The same house that had been a symbol of foolishness now stood as a resource. The same purchase they had mocked was now their solution. I listened quietly. Inside me, something complex unfolded. Not revenge, not triumph, but clarity. I remembered the winter nights alone. The laughter on that gray afternoon. The word lucky spoken too casually over dinner. I also remembered my father's handwriting. Opportunity whispers. But so does dignity. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm. I explained that I had already made plans. The house would not be leveraged for anyone else's risk. I would protect what I had built. Carefully, intentionally. The disappointment in their eyes was subtle but unmistakable. As they left that evening, the door closed gently behind them. I stood in the hallway, listening to their footsteps fade into the hum of evening traffic and distant trains. For the first time, I did not feel the need to prove anything. The house was no longer about value. It was about boundaries. And I had finally learned how to build those too. The night after they left, the house felt quieter than it ever had before. Not empty, not lonely, quiet in a way that suggested completion. Outside, the metro station glowed under soft white lights, commuters moving in steady streams like currents in a river that had finally found its course. The sound of arriving trains rolled gently beneath the ground. No longer a distant dream, but a living presence beneath my feet. Alder Street had transformed. Where weeds once grew, cafe tables now stood. Where cracked pavement once split the sidewalk, polished stone reflected city lights. And yet, the greatest transformation had happened inside me. In the weeks that followed, my family's visits became less frequent. The urgency in their tone faded, replaced by polite distance. My sister adjusted her expectations. My mother stopped speaking about luck. Even my husband, who had once watched from the doorway with uncertainty, began to look at me differently, not with doubt but with respect. He had seen the months of silent work, the patience, the discipline. Success had not made me louder. It had made me steadier. One evening, I stood alone on the front porch, watching the neighborhood settle into its new rhythm. The air carried the faint metallic scent of train tracks and fresh asphalt. Warm light spilled from my windows behind me, illuminating the steps that had once been cracked and uneven. I thought of the day they laughed. I could still hear it clearly, the lightness in their voices, the certainty that I had made a mistake. But the memory no longer stung. It felt distant, almost instructive. Their laughter had not been cruelty. It had been limitation. They had measured my decision against their comfort, not against possibility. And I had chosen possibility. Inside, framed on the hallway wall, hung a small copy of my father's petition letter. Not displayed as a trophy, but as a reminder. Vision does not announce itself with applause. It waits quietly for someone willing to trust it. The doorbell rang once more that week, but this time it was a neighbor, welcoming me properly to the revitalized block. New families had moved in. Small businesses were opening. Alder Street was no longer the worst place to live. It was the place people wished they had noticed sooner. As I closed the door that night, I felt no need for vindication. The house stood solid and warm around me. The floors no longer creaked from neglect but from life. The garden bloomed beneath the porch light, simple and deliberate. 18 months ago, they had laughed at the worst house on the block. Now the block revolved around it. And I understood something deeper than profit or property value. The real investment had never been in bricks or land. It had been in belief. Belief in quiet research. In patient work. In listening when others dismiss. The trains continued to arrive and depart, steady and predictable. This time, I was already exactly where I needed to be.